The job posting had been specific about 3 things: a valid driver's license, comfort with overnight isolation, and no history of sleepwalking. The third requirement should have made me ask questions. Instead, I submitted my application the same afternoon I found it, 2 months behind on rent, and 3 weeks removed from losing my position at the community college planetarium in Tucson. I had a master's degree in astrophysics and $11 in my checking account. I was not in a position to ask questions. The flight from Phoenix to Kona took 6 hours with a layover in Los Angeles. A man named Harlan Reese met me at the baggage claim. He was perhaps 60, with a white beard trimmed close to his jaw and hands that looked like they had spent decades handling heavy equipment. He shook my hand once, firmly, and told me the drive to the summit would take 2.5 hours. He did not ask about my flight. The Subaru climbed through coffee country first, past macadamia orchards and small towns with churches older than statehood. Then the road narrowed and steepened, switchbacking through cloud forest that smelled of wet fern and rotting guava. Harlan did not play music. He pointed out landmarks with economical gestures. The ranger station at 6,000 feet, the visitor center at 9,000, the turnoff for the emergency helipad. "You'll memorize all of this," he said. "Distances, elevations, drive times. It matters." I nodded. The air was thinning. My ears popped twice before we cleared the clouds. Above the inversion layer, the landscape changed completely. The vegetation vanished. Red cinder stretched in every direction, punctuated by old lava flows, and the silver domes of observatories clustered along the ridgeline. I counted 11 of them, scattered across the summit like drops of mercury on rust-colored cloth. "Ours is the one at the end," Harlan said, "farthest from the access road, the Kealoha Array." I had read about it during my preparation. A privately funded installation built in 2011 with money from a telecommunications fortune. 3 domes, a control building, and a maintenance garage. Capacity for 4 staff, but typically operated with 2. The job paid $62,000 annually with housing included, which was considerably above market rate for an assistant technician position. I had attributed this to the isolation. We pulled into the lower parking area at 4:17 p.m. The sun was still high, the sky a deep cobalt that seemed closer than it had any right to be. At nearly 14,000 feet, the atmosphere was thin enough that I could feel my pulse in my temples. "You'll acclimatize," Harlan said, reading my expression. "Takes about a week. Don't exert yourself until then." He led me through the control building, pointing out the essentials. The main monitoring station with its bank of screens, the radio console, the kitchenette, the 2 small bedrooms at the back. Everything was functional and slightly dated, the equipment well maintained, but clearly installed in a different decade. The walls held framed photographs of celestial objects, nebulae, galaxies, the rings of Saturn, alongside a single topographical map of the summit area with distances marked in red ink. "You'll sleep here during your shifts," Harlan said, indicating the bedroom on the left. 4 nights on, 3 nights off. During your off rotation, you can stay at the mid-level facility or drive down to Hilo. Most people drive down. What about you? I'm on days now, have been for 3 years. You and I will overlap for about 90 minutes each shift. Me coming on at 6 a.m., you signing off at 7:30. That's the handoff window. He opened a metal cabinet near the radio console and withdrew a binder. The cover was unlabeled, the pages inside protected by plastic sleeves. He set it on the desk with a care that seemed deliberate. "This is the protocol manual," he said. "You'll read it tonight before your first solo shift tomorrow. All of it. Don't skim." I opened the binder. The first page was a table of contents listing standard operational procedures: dome calibration, equipment maintenance, weather monitoring, emergency contacts. But the second page was different. It was titled Overnight Protocols and began with a numbered list written in a typeface I did not recognize. "These are the rules," Harlan said. "They're not negotiable. They're not suggestions. You follow them exactly, every night, without deviation. Do you understand?" I looked up at him. His expression was neutral, but there was something behind his eyes. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of weighted patience. "What happens if I don't?" He did not answer the question. Instead, he tapped the binder twice with his index finger. "Read them tonight. I'll answer what I can in the morning." Then he left me alone with the protocols. I made coffee in the kitchenette and sat at the monitoring station as the sun dropped toward the horizon. The binder lay open in front of me. I read the overnight protocols 3 times, trying to convince myself they were an elaborate hazing ritual for new employees. They were not. The rules were as follows. 1. Between 1:45 a.m. and 2:15 a.m., the primary dome must remain sealed regardless of scheduled observations. Do not override the lockout. If the dome begins to open on its own during this window, leave the control room and wait in the maintenance corridor until 2:16. 2. The seeing monitor will occasionally display readings below 0.3 arc seconds. This is not possible at this elevation under any atmospheric conditions. If you observe such a reading, do not log it. Verify manually with the backup gauge. If the backup gauge confirms the reading, power down the seeing monitor for exactly 7 minutes. 3. Do not respond to communications on Channel 4. That frequency was decommissioned in 2019. If you hear transmissions on Channel 4, switch to Channel 6 and perform a standard radio check with the mid-level facility. Do not mention what you heard. 4. If you observe a light source at bearing 270 degrees that does not correspond to any cataloged object, do not attempt to track or photograph it. Log the time of observation and look away. Do not observe that bearing again for the remainder of your shift. 5. The external catwalk surrounding Dome B is restricted after midnight. If you must access it for emergency maintenance, do so only in pairs, and maintain visual contact with your partner at all times. If you are alone, do not access the catwalk under any circumstances. 6. Count the vehicles in the lower parking area at the beginning of your shift and every 2 hours thereafter. During overnight operations, there should be exactly 2 vehicles, your own and the emergency response truck. If you count 3 or more vehicles, do not investigate. Remain inside and radio the mid-level facility using the phrase parking discrepancy. They will advise. 7. The maintenance corridor connecting the control building to Dome A measures exactly 47 paces at a normal walking stride. Count your steps each time you traverse it. If the count differs from 47, return to your starting point immediately and wait 15 minutes before attempting the corridor again. 8. Do not respond to knocking on any external door after sunset. Use the intercom verification system for all arrivals. If a visitor cannot be verified via intercom, do not open the door regardless of what they say or how they identify themselves. 9. If the backup generator activates without a corresponding power loss, remain at your station. Do not investigate the generator housing. The generator will cycle off within 9 minutes. If it runs longer than 9 minutes, radio the mid-level facility and request immediate daylight support. 10. Stellar positions in the eastern quadrant may appear to shift by several degrees during certain atmospheric conditions. This is a known optical phenomenon. Do not document these shifts in the observation log. If a colleague or researcher asks about positional anomalies, inform them that the calibration is under review. 11. Between 3 a.m. and 3:30 a.m., keep all logs closed and all recording equipment paused. Resume documentation at 3:31 a.m. There are no exceptions to this protocol. 12. If you hear footsteps on the external walkways and no personnel are scheduled outside. Continue your assigned tasks without acknowledging the sound. Do not approach the windows. Do not attempt to identify the source. 13. The secondary parking area, located 200 meters downhill on the access road, is equipped with a motion-activated floodlight. Check this light visually from the control room window every 4 hours. If the light is off or flickering, do not descend to reset it manually. Log the malfunction and notify day staff during handoff. I finished reading as the last edge of the sun disappeared below the horizon. The sky shifted from orange to purple to black with a speed that seemed wrong, though I knew it was simply the altitude and the thin air. Stars emerged in clusters, then in floods, until the entire dome of the sky was burning with light. I looked west toward bearing 270 degrees. There was nothing unusual there, just stars, thousands of them, arranged in patterns I had studied for 20 years. I closed the binder and did not open it again until morning. Harlan arrived at 6:15 the next day. I had not slept. The overnight had been uneventful. No anomalies, no radio traffic, no reason to test any of the protocols. But I had spent the hours checking the parking lot every 30 minutes instead of every 2 hours, counting my steps through the maintenance corridor, even when I did not need to traverse it, watching the dome controls for any sign of unauthorized movement. "You look tired," Harlan said, setting down a thermos of coffee. I read the protocols. He nodded as if this explained everything. Questions. I had dozens. I asked the only one that mattered. Are they real? He pulled up a chair and sat across from me at the monitoring station. His movements were slow, unhurried. You have a degree in astrophysics. You've worked in observatories before. You know how the sky works. Yes. Then you know that what's in that binder doesn't make sense. Stars don't shift position. Radio frequencies don't transmit by themselves. Corridors don't change length. He paused. But you also know that at this altitude, at this location, with the equipment we operate, we observe things that other facilities don't. That's why the Kealoha Array was built here. That's why it's funded the way it's funded. What does it observe? That's above my clearance. He said it without irony. I maintain the equipment. You'll maintain the equipment. The researchers come up twice a year, run their programs, take their data, and leave. What they're looking for, what they're finding. That's not our job. And the protocols. Our job is to keep the facility running and to follow the protocols. That's it. He stood, refilled his coffee, and checked one of the monitors. The protocols exist because someone learned, at some point, that they were necessary. I don't know the history. I don't want to know. What I know is that in 11 years working here, I have never violated a protocol, and I have never had a serious incident. Have there been serious incidents? He looked at me for a long moment. There have been personnel changes. I did not ask him to elaborate. My second night was quiet until 1:37 a.m. I was running a standard calibration routine on the secondary telescope when the dome controls flickered. The primary dome was sealed, as it should have been. I had verified the lockout at midnight, but the indicator lights on the control panel stuttered briefly, green to amber to green. I checked the time, 1:37, still 8 minutes before the restricted window. I logged the flicker and continued the calibration. The dome indicators remained green. At 1:44, I saved my work, powered down the calibration interface, and moved to the center of the control room, away from the dome controls. I watched the clock on the wall. The second hand moved with a precision that felt deliberate. 1:45. The dome remained sealed. The indicator lights stayed green. I heard nothing unusual, no mechanical sounds from the dome housing, no wind against the external walls, no footsteps on the catwalks. I stood there for 30 minutes, watching the controls. At 2:15, the restricted window ended. The dome had not moved. I logged the uneventful observation and resumed my calibration at 2:23 a.m. At 2:41, I heard the radio. It was not a voice exactly. It was static, shaped in a way that suggested speech, rising and falling in patterns that mimicked human cadence. The sound came from the console, from a speaker I had not touched. I crossed to the radio and checked the frequency display. Channel 4. My hand hovered over the dial. The static continued, almost rhythmic now, as if something were trying to form words just below the threshold of intelligibility. I could feel the sound in my chest, a low vibration that seemed to bypass my ears entirely. I did not respond. Instead, I switched to Channel 6 and pressed the transmit button. Kealoha, array to mid-level, radio check. The response came immediately, clear and human. Mid-level copies, Kealoha. How's your night? Quiet, I said. Just running calibrations. Copy that. Call if you need anything. I released the transmit button and looked back at Channel 4. The static had stopped. The speaker was silent. I logged the incident at 2:43, using the precise wording the protocols implied. Anomalous transmission observed on decommissioned frequency. No response made. Standard radio check completed on Channel 6. Then I went to the window and counted the vehicles in the lower parking lot. 2. I counted them again. 2. I returned to the calibration routine and did not look at the radio again until dawn. By the end of my first week, I had developed a rhythm. I arrived at the facility by 6 p.m., completed my handoff with Harlan by 7:30, and spent the first hours of darkness running equipment checks and reviewing observation logs. The actual astronomical work was minimal. Most of it was automated, which left me with long stretches of monitoring that were interrupted only by the protocol requirements. I checked the parking lot every 2 hours. I counted my steps through the maintenance corridor each time I traversed it. I kept the logs closed between 3 and 3:30 a.m. I did not look toward bearing 270 degrees more than necessary. The protocols became automatic. I performed them without conscious thought, the way one might lock a door or turn off a stove. On my 5th night, I learned why they mattered. It started at 11:42 p.m. with the seeing monitor. I was at the main console reviewing data from the previous night's observation run when the display caught my attention. The seeing value, a measure of atmospheric turbulence that affected image quality, was fluctuating rapidly, jumping between 0.8 and 1.2 arcseconds in an irregular pattern. Then it dropped. 0.5 arcseconds. 0.4. 0.3. 0.2. I stared at the display. At this elevation, under the best possible conditions, seeing values rarely dropped below 0.5. The instrument specifications listed Dorari as the theoretical lower limit of the sensor's range. The display now read 0.1 arcseconds. I thought of Protocol 2. I crossed to the backup gauge, a mechanical instrument mounted on the wall near the dome access hatch. The needle was steady at 0.9 arcseconds, a normal reading for current conditions. I returned to the seeing monitor. It now read 0.08 arcseconds. According to the protocol, a discrepancy like this required a 7-minute shutdown. I reached for the power switch. Then the display changed. It was no longer showing numbers. It was showing something else, a pattern of lines and shapes that might have been static, might have been interference, might have been something attempting to resolve itself into an image. I powered down the monitor. The screen went dark. I checked the clock. 11:47 p.m. I would restart it at 11:54. I sat in the silence, listening to the hum of the other equipment, the distant whisper of wind against the external walls. The backup gauge held steady at 0.9. The dome controls showed green. Everything was normal except for the thing I had just turned off. At 11:54, I powered the seeing monitor back on. It displayed 0.87 arcseconds. Normal. Exactly what the backup gauge showed. I logged the incident and continued my shift. The next night, Harlan left me a note. It was tucked into the protocol binder, a single sheet of paper covered in his careful handwriting. The note was dated 3 years earlier and appeared to be a copy of something he had written for himself, or perhaps for a predecessor. The note read, "Additional protocols added after the incident of March 2022. These supplement the original list and should be followed with equal rigor. 14. If the seeing monitor displays impossible readings for longer than 3 minutes before you notice, do not attempt to review recorded data from that period. Delete the relevant files without viewing them and log the deletion as routine maintenance. 15. The access road from the summit to the mid-level facility is exactly 4.7 miles. If your vehicle's odometer shows a different distance during descent, do not stop. Drive at a constant speed until you reach the ranger station, then radio from there. 16. Researchers may occasionally request access to the facility during overnight hours for special observation windows. These requests must be verified by 2 independent contacts at the main office during business hours. Do not admit researchers after sunset based solely on email or radio communication. 17. If you observe another person on the external walkways after midnight, and that person is wearing the standard observatory jacket with the emblem on the left breast, verify that the emblem is correctly oriented. If the emblem appears reversed or inverted, do not acknowledge the person. Return to the control room and remain there until dawn. 18. The emergency supply cache in the maintenance corridor contains 17 items. Inventory them at the beginning of each shift. If the count differs from 17, do not use any item from the cache until the discrepancy has been investigated by day staff. 19. During nights with no lunar illumination, you may observe lights moving along the access road below the facility. If these lights do not correspond to scheduled arrivals or departures, do not track them. They will reach the lower parking area, pause, and then continue past the facility toward the summit. Do not observe where they go. I read the note 3 times, then placed it back in the binder. That night, I inventoried the emergency supply cache for the first time. It contained 4 bottles of water, 2 flashlights with spare batteries, 1 first aid kit, 1 emergency blanket, 2 protein bars, 1 radio with fixed frequency, 1 paper map of the summit area, 1 laminated instruction card, 1 pocket knife, 1 roll of duct tape, 1 box of waterproof matches, and 1 small container of salt. 17 items. I logged the count and did not question the inclusion of salt. The first real test came 3 weeks into my employment. I was at the monitoring station at 12:51 a.m. when the lights in the control room flickered. Not a full blackout, just a momentary dimming, lasting perhaps 2 seconds. The equipment continued to run. The dome controls showed green. Then the backup generator activated. I heard it spin up in the housing behind the building, the diesel engine catching with a low rumble that I could feel through the floor. But the main power had not failed. The lights were on. The monitors were active. There was no reason for the generator to engage. Protocol 9. I remained at my station. I did not investigate. The generator ran for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I counted. Then it cycled off, and the facility returned to its normal hum. I logged the incident. Backup generator activation at 0051. Duration 4 and 17 tools. No corresponding power loss. Remained at station per protocol. At 1:14 a.m., I heard the knocking. It came from the main entrance, a solid door at the front of the control building. 3 knocks, spaced evenly, with a weight that suggested a human hand. I did not move. Protocol 8 was clear. Do not respond to knocking after sunset. Use the intercom verification system. I crossed to the intercom panel, mounted beside the door. The exterior camera showed a figure standing on the concrete pad outside the entrance. The image was grainy. The camera was old, the lighting poor, but I could make out a person in a jacket, facing the door, arms at their sides. I pressed the intercom button. "Identify yourself." No response. I tried again. "This is the Kealoha Array. Identify yourself and state your business." The figure did not move. It did not speak. I watched the camera feed for several minutes. The figure remained motionless, facing the door, as if waiting for something. Then, at 1:23 a.m., it turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the range of the exterior lights. I checked the parking lot. 2 vehicles. I checked the access road camera. Empty. I logged the incident and continued my shift. At 2 a.m., I performed my scheduled vehicle count, 2 vehicles in the lower lot. I was returning to the monitoring station when I noticed the seeing monitor. The display read 0.2 arc seconds. I had not noticed it drop. I did not know how long it had been showing that value. Protocol 14 applied. If the impossible reading persisted for more than 3 minutes before I noticed, I was not to review the recorded data. I checked the timestamp on the monitor's log. The reading had first appeared at 1:57 a.m. It was now 2:03, 6 minutes. I deleted the data from 1:57 to 2:03 without viewing it. I logged the deletion as routine maintenance. I powered down the seeing monitor for 7 minutes, as Protocol 2 required. When I restarted it, the display showed 0.91 arc seconds. Normal. I sat at the console and watched the monitors until dawn, checking the parking lot every 30 minutes instead of every 2 hours, counting my steps through the maintenance corridor, even when I had no reason to go there. Harlan arrived at 6:12 a.m. I told him about the generator, the knocking, the seeing monitor. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he nodded once. "Good," he said. "You followed the protocols. What was at the door? Did you open it?" "No." "Then it doesn't matter what it was." He said it without cruelty, without condescension. It was a simple statement of operational fact. The protocols were the protocols. What lay beyond them was not my concern. I accepted this for nearly 2 months. Then I met Sarah Chen. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, part of a research team scheduled for a 3-night observation run. There were 4 of them, 2 postdocs from Caltech, a graduate student from the University of Hawaii, and Dr. Chen, who led the team. She was perhaps 45, with short gray hair and a manner that suggested decades of fieldwork in difficult conditions. "You're the new night tech," she said when we met. It was not a question. 3 months now. "How are you finding the protocols?" The question surprised me. None of the previous researchers had mentioned the protocols at all. They came, ran their observations, collected their data, and left, treating me as part of the equipment. "They're detailed," I said carefully. Dr. Chen smiled. It was not a warm smile. "They're incomplete." She did not elaborate. The observation run proceeded normally, the researchers working the domes during the early evening hours while I monitored from the control room. By 11 p.m., they had finished their active observations and retired to the mid-level facility, leaving their instruments to run automated programs through the night. The protocols for nights with active research teams were the same as any other night. The team had been briefed. They knew not to return after sunset. At 12:17 a.m., the radio crackled. "Kealoha Array, this is Chen. Do you copy?" I checked the channel. 6, the standard frequency. "Copy, Dr. Chen. How can I help?" I left a data card in Dome B. "I need it for tomorrow's analysis. Can you retrieve it for me?" I hesitated. The request was reasonable. The data card was probably exactly where she said it was, but something about the phrasing felt wrong. "Dr. Chen, can you verify your location?" A pause. Then, "I'm at the mid-level facility, room 7. Why?" Standard security question. What's the access code for Dome B? Another pause, longer this time. I don't remember. Your supervisor set it up. I knew the access code for Dome B. Dr. Chen had entered it herself in front of me less than 6 hours ago. She had typed it without hesitation. I'll retrieve the card in the morning, I said. It'll be in your materials at handoff. I need it now. The voice was different now, flatter, more insistent. I'm coming up to get it. I looked at the parking lot camera. 2 vehicles. Dr. Chen, I can't authorize after-hours access. The card will be available at 6 a.m. The radio went silent. I sat at the console, watching the cameras, watching the access road. No vehicles approached. The night remained still. At 6:14 a.m., Harlan arrived. 10 minutes later, Dr. Chen walked in behind him, looking tired but entirely normal. Did you find the data card? She asked. I haven't checked Dome B yet. Oh, she frowned. I thought I left it there, but I found it in my bag this morning. Sorry to trouble you. I did not tell her about the radio call. I did not know what to say. When she left, I pulled Harlan aside. Someone called on Channel 6 last night, claiming to be Dr. Chen. They asked me to retrieve a data card from Dome B. Harlan's expression did not change. Did you go? No, they couldn't remember the access code. He nodded slowly. Good, that's good. He paused. Dr. Chen was at the mid-level facility all night. I spoke to her at 5 this morning. She hadn't been on the radio. Then who? It doesn't matter. He cut me off. You didn't go. That's what matters. He walked away, and I understood that some questions were not meant to be answered. The incident with the false Dr. Chen prompted me to add my own notes to the protocol binder. I did not share them with Harlan. They were observations, patterns. I had noticed that the official protocols did not address. I wrote, Personal Observations, June 2024. A. The anomalies are more frequent during new moon phases. Keep track of lunar cycles and increase vigilance accordingly. B. The temperature inside the control room drops by several degrees, approximately 10 minutes before an incident begins. I have started keeping a thermometer at the monitoring station. C. The static on Channel 4 has a pattern. It repeats in cycles of approximately 43 seconds. I do not know what this means, but I have logged the timing on 4 separate occasions. D. Whatever appears at the door does not cast a shadow when illuminated by the exterior lights. The figure I saw on the camera was solid, but the concrete beneath it showed no shadow. This may be a camera artifact. It may not be. E. The seeing monitor displays impossible readings more often when Dome A is pointed toward bearing 270 degrees. I have begun scheduling observations to avoid that bearing when possible. I did not know if these observations were useful. I did not know if anyone would ever read them. But the act of writing them down made me feel less alone with what I was experiencing. Summer turned to fall. The nights grew longer. The incidents grew more frequent. In August, I counted 3 vehicles in the lower parking lot for the first time. I radioed the mid-level facility using the prescribed phrase, parking discrepancy, and waited. The dispatcher, a woman named Lonnie, whom I had never met in person, responded immediately. Copy Kealoha, remain inside. We're checking manifests. 20 minutes later, she called back. All personnel accounted for. 3rd vehicle should not be there. Do not investigate. Repeat, do not investigate. We're sending day crew at first light. I spent the rest of the night watching the cameras. The 3rd vehicle, a white sedan that I did not recognize, sat in the lot, engine off, lights off, apparently empty. At 5:47 a.m., as the first gray light touched the summit, I looked away from the monitor to refill my coffee. When I looked back, the sedan was gone. The lot showed 2 vehicles, mine and the emergency truck. Harlan arrived at 6:11. I told him about the sedan. He walked to the window and studied the lot for a long moment. "There are tire tracks," he said. "Fresh ones, leading down the access road." "I didn't see it leave." "You weren't supposed to." That afternoon, I drove down to Hilo for my 3 days off. The odometer showed 4.7 miles from the summit to the mid-level facility, exactly as it should. But as I passed the ranger station, I noticed something strange. The mile marker at the roadside read 7.2. I did not stop. I drove at a constant speed until I reached Hilo, then pulled into a gas station and sat in my car for 15 minutes, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. In September, the sky started sending warnings. I was at the monitoring station at 1:12 a.m., running a routine check on the telescope tracking systems, when I noticed an alert on the observation log. The automated program had flagged an anomaly. A star in the eastern quadrant had moved. Not a satellite, not a meteor, not an aircraft. A star. The system had logged its position at 12:48 a.m., then again at 12:59 a.m. The difference was 3.7 degrees. An enormous shift, impossible for any fixed celestial object. I remembered Protocol 10. Do not document these shifts. I deleted the flagged entries, but I could not stop myself from looking at the sky. I went to the window that faced east and stared out at the stars. They were arranged in familiar patterns, the same constellations I had studied since childhood. Orion, Taurus, the Pleiades. Everything was where it should be. Then I noticed the gap. There was a patch of sky, perhaps 5 degrees across, where no stars were visible. It was not clouds. The night was clear, the seeing perfect. It was simply an absence, a darkness that was darker than the surrounding sky. As I watched, the gap moved. It drifted slowly northward, occluding stars as it passed. I could see them wink out one by one, disappearing behind whatever was blocking them, then reappearing on the other side. I stepped back from the window. My heart was pounding. The gap continued its slow drift, moving toward the zenith. I lost sight of it as it passed overhead, beyond the angle of the window. I did not go outside to look. I did not document what I had seen. At 2:15 a.m., I checked the sky again. The gap was gone. The stars had returned to their proper positions. I added another note to my personal observations. Occlusion event, September 14th. Estimated size 5 degrees. Duration approximately 1 hour. Movement pattern, south to north. No explanation. The next night, it happened again, and the night after that. By October, I had documented 17 separate occlusion events. They varied in size, duration, and direction of movement. The largest was nearly 8 degrees across. The longest lasted 2 hours and 43 minutes. I began to think of them as transits, like a planet crossing the face of a star. Something was passing between the observatory and the sky. Something that moved with purpose, that followed patterns I could not decipher. Something that was getting closer. In late October, Harlan gave me the amendments. He handed me a second binder, thinner than the first, with a red cover and no label. "These are additional protocols," he said. "They were developed after incidents in 2019 and 2022. You should have received them earlier. I apologize for the delay." The amendments were as follows. 20. If you observe an occlusion event, a region of sky where stars are not visible, and the region appears to move, do not attempt to photograph or track it. Note the approximate size and direction of movement in your personal log only. Do not add this information to the official observation log. T1. During occlusion events, all external doors must remain sealed. Do not open any door for any reason until the event has concluded. 22. If an occlusion event passes directly overhead, within 15 degrees of zenith, Reduce all interior lighting to minimum levels and remain motionless for 5 minutes after it passes. 23. The supply cache in the maintenance corridor has been expanded. It now contains 23 items. Update your inventory count accordingly. 24. During the week of the winter solstice, December 18th, 2025, double all patrol frequencies. Check the parking lot every hour instead of every 2 hours. Count your steps through the maintenance corridor after each traversal, regardless of whether you have reason to traverse it. 25. If you receive radio communication that uses the correct codes but the wrong date, do not respond. Log the incident and switch to Channel 6 immediately. 26. A new emergency frequency has been established, Channel 9. This frequency should only be used during a declared emergency. If you hear transmissions on Channel 9 that do not correspond to a declared emergency, do not respond and do not switch to that channel. I read the amendments twice, then added them to my personal copy of the protocol binder. The inventory count was correct. The supply cache now contained 23 items. The additional items were 2 more bottles of water, a second emergency blanket, a signal mirror, and a small plastic container labeled chalk in Harlan's handwriting. I did not ask what the chalk was for. November brought the storms. The summit is above most weather, but November is the season when systems occasionally push high enough to affect operations. Snow is rare but not unknown. Wind is constant and sometimes violent. On the night of November 11th, a system moved in from the northwest. I watched it approach on the weather radar, a dense mass of precipitation that the mid-level facility warned would bring sustained winds of 50 miles per hour and gusts up to 70. I secured the domes, lowered the shutters on all external windows, and hunkered down in the control room to wait it out. At 11:32 p.m., the power failed. The darkness was absolute. I heard the wind screaming against the walls, felt the building shudder with each gust. Then the backup generator kicked in, and the emergency lights flickered to life, casting the control room in a dim red glow. The generator had activated during a power loss. That was normal. That was what it was supposed to do. I checked the equipment. Most of the monitors were dark. The generator provided limited power, enough for emergency lighting and the radio, but not much else. The dome controls were offline. The cameras were offline. I was alone in a damaged building, on a mountain in a storm, with no way to observe what was happening outside. Protocol 9 did not apply. This was a legitimate power loss, not a false activation. But I had no protocols for this specific situation. The emergency procedures in the binder assumed I would have power for critical systems. I radioed the mid-level facility. Kealoha to mid-level, declaring emergency. Main power loss, operating on backup generator. Requesting guidance. Static. I tried again. Kealoha to mid-level, do you copy? More static. Then, faintly, a voice. Mid-level copies Kealoha. What's your status? Main power out, backup running, limited visibility. All external systems offline, storm damage unknown. A pause. Copy that, sit tight. We'll send a crew at first light if roads are passable. Understood, Kealoha standing by. I sat at the radio console, listening to the wind and the occasional crackle of interference. The storm was supposed to last until morning. I had 6 hours to wait. At 12:17 a.m., the generator failed. The emergency lights went out. The radio went silent. I was in complete darkness. The only sound, the howling of the wind and my own breathing. I had a flashlight in my pocket. Standard procedure, always carry a light source. But I did not turn it on immediately. I sat in the darkness, letting my eyes adjust, trying to think. The supply cache had 2 flashlights with spare batteries. It also had a radio with a fixed frequency. I could traverse the maintenance corridor, retrieve the emergency supplies, and establish contact with the mid-level facility. 47 steps. I stood, turned on my flashlight, and moved toward the corridor. The maintenance corridor was cold, not the ordinary cold of a high-altitude night without heating, but a deeper chill that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. I counted my steps carefully, placing each foot with deliberate precision. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The beam of my flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the darkness. The corridor was bare concrete, lined with pipes and conduits that carried power and data between the control building and Dome A. I had walked it hundreds of times, 22, 23, 24. I was approximately halfway when I heard the footsteps. They came from behind me, back toward the control room. Heavy, measured, matching my own pace. Step for step, I stopped. The footsteps stopped. Protocol 12. If you hear footsteps and no personnel are scheduled outside, continue your tasks without acknowledging the sound. But I was not outside. I was in the maintenance corridor, and the corridor was a sealed space. No one should have been behind me. I resumed walking. The footsteps resumed as well. 37, 38, 39. I did not look back. I kept my eyes fixed on the far end of the corridor, where the door to Dome A waited. 45, 46, 47. I reached the door. I opened it and stepped through into the maintenance access chamber for Dome A. Behind me, the footsteps stopped at the threshold. I turned. The corridor was empty. My flashlight beam showed bare concrete, pipes, conduits. Nothing else. I closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. The supply cache was in the maintenance corridor, not in the dome. I would have to go back through. I waited 5 minutes, counting the seconds in my head. Then I opened the door and shone my light down the corridor. Empty. I walked back, counting steps. 47 exactly. The supply cache was mounted on the wall near the midpoint. I opened it and inventoried the contents. 23 items, all present. I took the emergency radio and one of the flashlights as backup, then returned to the control room. 47 steps, no accompanying footsteps. The emergency radio worked. Channel 9, the emergency frequency. Kealoha to mid-level, backup generator failure, operating on battery power. Please advise. The response was immediate but strange. Kealoha, this is mid-level. What is the date? I checked my watch. November 11th. A pause. Copy that. Sit tight. Crew dispatched at first light. Mid-level out. The date verification. Protocol 25. They were checking to make sure I was who I claimed to be. I wondered if something had tried to contact them pretending to be me. The storm continued through the night. I sat in the control room, conserving the flashlight battery, listening to the wind tear at the building. At 3 a.m., I closed the observation log as required, though there was nothing to observe and no way to record it. At 3:17 a.m., the knocking started. Not at the main entrance this time. It came from the dome access hatch, the internal door that connected the control room to Dome A's observation deck. A sealed door, never opened during storms. 3 knocks, then 3 more. Then a pattern that might have been a rhythm, or might have been random. I could not tell. I did not move. I did not respond. The knocking continued for 11 minutes. I counted. Then it stopped, and the building was silent except for the wind. At 5:48 a.m., the storm began to subside. At 6:22, the sun rose. Harlan did not arrive until 8 a.m., delayed by road conditions. When he walked in, his face was grim. Power station on the access road was damaged, he said. That's why you lost main power. Generator should have held longer, but it looks like something got into the housing. Something? Fuel line was disconnected. Clean disconnect, not storm damage. He paused. Someone disconnected it deliberately. I thought about the footsteps in the corridor, the knocking at the dome hatch. I heard things last night, I said. In the corridor, at the doors. Harlan nodded. The storms bring them closer. I should have warned you." He handed me another sheet of paper. "Emergency protocols for nights when the weather forces us to operate on limited power." I read the new protocols. Emergency Protocol 1. During power failures lasting more than 30 minutes, do not leave the control room except to access the supply cache. The maintenance corridor should be traversed only when absolutely necessary. Emergency Protocol 2. If the backup generator fails, do not attempt to repair it. Generator repairs must be performed by day staff only. Emergency Protocol 3. During storms with sustained winds over 40 miles per hour, don't use radio channels other than the emergency frequency, Channel 9. All other frequencies should be considered compromised. Emergency Protocol 4. If you hear knocking on internal doors during a storm, do not acknowledge it under any circumstances. Internal doors should remain sealed until the storm has passed and day staff have arrived. Emergency Protocol 5. The supply cache contains a container of chalk. If you must traverse the maintenance corridor during an emergency, draw a continuous line on the floor behind you as you walk. Do not break the line. When you return through the corridor, verify that the line is unbroken before proceeding. I read Emergency Protocol 5 3 times. "What does the chalk do?" Harlan looked at me for a long moment. "It tells you if you're alone." The winter solstice approached. I had been at the Kiloha Array for 6 months. I had followed the protocols without deviation. I had seen things that I could not explain and had chosen not to try. The job had become routine, if a routine could be built around terror. On December 18th, the solstice observation period began. The protocols required doubled patrol frequencies. I checked the parking lot every hour, counted my steps through the corridor after every traversal, inventoried the supply cache at the beginning and middle of each shift. I was meticulous. I was precise. On the night of December 21st, the longest night of the year, everything changed. It started at 9:47 p.m., earlier than any previous incident. I was at the monitoring station, running a standard equipment check, when the seeing monitor flickered. I had learned to watch it carefully, to catch the impossible readings before they persisted too long. The display read 0.2 arc seconds. I checked the backup gauge. 0.85. I powered down the seeing monitor and started the 7-minute count. But before I finished, the dome controls flickered. Both domes, A and B, both indicators jumped from green to amber. It was 9:51 p.m., hours before the restricted window. I pulled up the dome control interface. The system showed an anomaly. Both domes were receiving open commands from an unknown source. The commands were being blocked by the safety interlocks, but the attempts were continuous. Something was trying to open the domes. I locked out the control interface entirely, cutting off all remote commands. The indicators stabilized at green. At 9:53, the radio crackled, Channel 4. The static was different this time. It was not the rhythmic pattern I had documented before. It was sharp, urgent, almost like speech compressed and distorted beyond recognition. I did not respond. I switched to Channel 6. Ki aloha to mid-level. Radio check. Silence. I tried again. Ki aloha to mid-level. Do you copy? Still nothing. I switched to Channel 9, the emergency frequency. Ki aloha declaring emergency. Dome control anomaly. Radio interference. Requesting immediate advisory. The response came, but it was wrong. Ki aloha. This is mid-level. Please verify date and code phrase. I gave the date, December 21st. Copy. Code phrase? I hesitated. There was no code phrase in any of my protocols. I had never been asked for one. I don't have a code phrase, I said. Repeat, no code phrase in my documentation. A long pause. Then, Ki aloha, this is not mid-level. Repeat, this is not mid-level. Cease transmission on all frequencies. Seal all doors. Remain inside until dawn. The voice was different now, Harlan's voice. "Harlan, is that you?" "Cease transmission. Do not respond to any further communication tonight. Do not open any doors. Do not look at the sky." The radio went dead. I sat in the silence, staring at the console. The seeing monitor was still powered down. The dome controls showed green. Everything appeared normal, but I knew it was not. Do not look at the sky. I went to the window that faced east and looked out. The occlusion was directly overhead. It was massive, larger than any I had seen before, covering perhaps 20 degrees of sky. And it was not moving. It hung there, a perfect circle of darkness, blotting out the stars at the zenith. As I watched, I realized it was not a circle. It was an eye. I stepped back from the window. My heart was racing. Protocol 22. During occlusion events passing directly overhead, reduce lighting to minimum levels and remain motionless for 5 minutes. I killed the lights. I stood in the darkness, not moving, barely breathing. 5 minutes. I counted the seconds, 300 of them, each one stretching like an hour. When I reached 300, I turned the lights back on and looked at the window. The occlusion had moved. It was now in the eastern sky, perhaps 30 degrees above the horizon, drifting slowly toward the north. But it had left something behind. On the glass of the window, on the inside of the glass, there was a mark, a shape drawn in what looked like frost, though the control room was warm. The shape was complex, lines and curves that almost formed a pattern, almost made sense, almost resolved into something I could understand. I did not try to understand it. I got the container of salt from the supply cache and poured a line across the windowsill. Then I covered the window with a tarp from the maintenance supplies and did not look at it again. The rest of the night was a siege. At 11:14 p.m., the footsteps returned. They circled the building. I could track their progress by the sound, moving from west to south to east to north, then starting again. They did not stop for 4 hours. At 12:23 a.m., something knocked on every external door in sequence. Main entrance, dome access hatch, emergency exit, storage room door. The same pattern at each door. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, then a rapid burst that sounded almost like laughter. At 1:45 a.m., the dome controls flickered again. This time, both indicators went red. The domes were opening. I ran to the control panel and tried to override, but the system was locked out, my own lockout from earlier. I could not access the controls. I could not stop the domes from opening. I watched the position indicators. Dome A, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 30 degrees. Dome B, 15 degrees, 25 degrees. I did the only thing I could think of. I killed the power to the dome motors. The main breaker was in a panel near the kitchenette. I pulled it, and the motors went silent. The domes stopped moving. A at 34 degrees. B at 27. Partially open. Exposed to whatever was in the sky. I returned to the monitoring station. The seeing monitor was still off. The dome controls were red and unresponsive. The footsteps continued their circuit outside. I sat at the console and waited for dawn. At 2:15 a.m., the restricted window began. I did not know what to do. The dome was supposed to be sealed during this window, and it was not. I had no protocol for this situation. I stayed at the console. I did not move. At 2:17 a.m., I heard the sound. It came from Dome A, from the opening in the dome. It was not wind. It was not mechanical noise. It was a voice. The voice was speaking my name. It said my name over and over, calmly, patiently, as if it had all the time in the world. It said my name in a tone that was almost warm, almost familiar, almost like someone who knew me and cared about me. I did not respond. Protocol 8. Do not respond to knocking after sunset. This was not knocking, but the principle was the same. I did not respond. The voice continued for 18 minutes. Then it stopped, mid-syllable. as if someone had flipped a switch. At 2:35 a.m., the restricted window ended. At 2:36, the dome motors hummed back to life. I had not turned the power back on. The position indicators moved. Dome A, 34 degrees, 20 degrees, 10 degrees, 0. Dome B, 27 degrees, 15 degrees, 0. Both domes sealed. Green indicators. I checked the breaker panel. The dome motor breaker was still pulled. I did not reset it. I left it pulled. The domes had closed themselves, using power that should not have existed. I decided not to think about what that meant. At 3 a.m., I closed all logs as required. At 3:31, I reopened them. At 4:14 a.m., the footsteps stopped. At 5:42 a.m., the sky began to lighten. At 6:03 a.m., I heard a vehicle on the access road. Harlan walked in at 6:17. He was not alone. A woman I did not recognize was with him. Tall, gray-haired, wearing civilian clothes rather than the standard observatory jacket. "This is Dr. Anand," Harlan said. "She's from the main office. She's here to conduct a review." I looked at Harlan, at his tired face and careful expression. "A review?" "Standard procedure after a significant incident." He glanced at the covered window, at the salt line on the sill. "You had a significant incident." Dr. Anand walked through the control room, examining equipment, checking logs. She did not speak to me directly. She made notes on a tablet. "The dome positions at 1:45 a.m., she said finally. "How did you close them?" "I didn't," I said. "They closed themselves." "With the motor breaker pulled?" "Yes." She made another note. Then she turned to face me fully. "Mr. Hayes, what you experienced last night was what we call a proximate event. The entity, or entities, that we observe at this facility came closer to direct contact than they have in several years." I waited. "The protocols exist to prevent contact. You followed them correctly, which is why you are still here and still yourself." She paused. "The domes closed because the protocols were followed. The entity withdrew when it could not achieve contact. The facility responded by sealing itself." The facility. The Kealoha array was designed with certain features that are not in any documentation you've seen, features that activate automatically under specific conditions. She studied my face. "You don't need to understand how they work. You need to understand that following the protocols is what triggers them." I thought about the salt, the chalk, the precise timing of every ritual action. "It's a system," I said. "The protocols are part of a system." "Yes," Dr. Anand almost smiled. "The rules are the mechanism. Your compliance is what makes them work." She left an hour later, taking Harlan with her for a debrief at the main office. I was left alone to process what had happened. I walked through the control room, checking equipment. The seeing monitor was back online, showing 0.89 arc seconds. The dome controls were green. The radio was receiving normal traffic on channel 6. I removed the tarp from the window. The mark was gone. The glass was clear, unmarked, as if nothing had ever touched it. I looked up at the sky, now bright with morning sun. The stars were invisible, hidden by daylight. But I knew they were still there, in their proper positions, unchanging and eternal. I also knew that something else was there, something that watched, something that waited, something that would try again. I went to my desk and began writing. The solstice incident changed things. In the weeks that followed, I compiled everything I had learned into a new document. Not a replacement for the official protocols. Those remained essential, but a supplement, a personal guide based on my own observations and experience. I wrote about the occlusion events, their patterns and timing. I wrote about the temperature drops that preceded incidents, the specific behaviors of the seeing monitor, the subtle wrongness of mimicked voices. I wrote about the chalk line and the salt, about the footsteps that circled but never crossed, about the restricted window and why it mattered. I wrote it for the next person. Harlan had told me early in my tenure that there had been personnel changes. I understood now what that meant. People had failed. People had broken protocols, opened doors, looked when they should not have looked, responded when they should not have responded. I did not intend to be one of them, but I also understood that I might not stay forever. The work was exhausting. The isolation was crushing. The knowledge of what existed beyond the protocols, what would happen if the protocols ever failed, was a weight I carried every night. Eventually, someone would replace me, and they would need to know what I knew. Spring came. The nights grew shorter. The incidents became less frequent, though they never stopped entirely. I continued to follow the protocols with obsessive precision, continued to document anomalies in my personal log, continued to survive. In April, I trained my first replacement. His name was David Reyes, 26 years old, fresh out of graduate school with a degree in planetary science. He had applied for the job for the same reason I had: money and desperation. I gave him the protocols on his first day, the same way Harlan had given them to me. I watched his face as he read them, the skepticism, the confusion, the dawning unease. "These are real?" he asked. "Follow them exactly," I said. "Everyone, every time. Don't skip, don't modify, don't rationalize. But what? It doesn't matter what. What matters is that you follow the rules." I stayed with him for his first 3 shifts, observing, answering questions when I could, redirecting him when I could not. I showed him the supply cache, the chalk and salt, the emergency radio. I showed him how to count his steps through the maintenance corridor, how to verify radio communications, how to check the parking lot cameras. On his 4th night, I left him alone. I drove down the access road, watching my odometer. 4.7 miles to the mid-level facility. Exactly right. I did not look at the sky. 3 months later, David called me. It was 4 a.m., the middle of his shift. "I need to ask you something," he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain beneath it. "The seeing monitor is showing 0.1 arc seconds. It's been like that for 7 minutes. What do I do?" "Did you power it down?" "I powered it down, waited 7 minutes, turned it back on. It's still showing 0.1. I closed my eyes. Protocol 14. If the impossible readings persist after a standard reset. "Delete the log data from the last 10 minutes, I said. "Then power it down again and leave it off for the rest of the night. Don't check it. Don't look at it. In the morning, tell Harlan what happened and let him decide whether to run diagnostics." "Okay," he paused. "There's something else. The parking lot. I've counted 5 times in the last hour. There are 3 vehicles. Did you radio the mid-level? They said to stay inside and wait. But it's been 2 hours. The 3rd vehicle is still there." I thought about the white sedan from my first summer, the one that had vanished when I looked away. "Don't go outside," I said. "Don't try to identify the vehicle. Keep counting every 30 minutes, and if the number changes, radio me immediately." "What if it doesn't change?" "Then you wait until dawn. The day crew will handle it." Silence on the line. Then, "How long did it take you to stop being afraid?" I did not lie to him. "I never stopped," I said. "I just learned to work around it." He made it through the night. The 3rd vehicle was gone by morning, leaving no trace, no tire tracks, no evidence that it had ever existed. David lasted 8 months before he requested a transfer. The reasons he gave were personal, family-related. I did not ask him to elaborate. His replacement was a woman named Maria Okafor, 32, with a background in radio astronomy and a medical discharge from the Navy that she did not discuss. She read the protocols without visible emotion and asked only practical questions: timing, equipment, verification procedures. "I've seen worse," she said when I asked if she had concerns. This is just another system." She was right. The protocols were a system. Follow the rules, maintain the equipment, survive the night. It was not complicated. It was only difficult. Maria stayed. She is still there now, running overnight shifts, while I handle days. We overlap for 90 minutes each morning, the way Harlan and I used to overlap. We share observations, update logs, make small adjustments to the protocols based on what we learn. The protocols continue to evolve. There are 37 rules now, plus 12 amendments and 7 emergency procedures. We have documented 116 incidents over the past 4 years, ranging from minor anomalies to events that required full evacuation of the summit. The Kealoha Array continues to operate. The researchers come twice a year, run their observations, collect their data. They do not ask about the protocols. They do not want to know. I understand. Sometimes I think about leaving. The job has worn grooves into me. I check locks I have already checked, count steps on flat ground, flinch at sudden sounds. I do not sleep well, even during my off rotations in high-low. I wake at 1:45 every night, whether I am at the summit or not. But the work is important, not the astronomy. The astronomy is incidental, but the watching. Someone has to watch. Someone has to follow the rules and make sure the rules are followed. Someone has to stand between what exists in that sky and everyone who does not know it is there. Tonight, I am on duty. Maria handed off at 7:30, her log entries precise and complete. No incidents during her shift. Seeing values normal. Dome controls green. Parking lot clear. I checked the supply cache. 41 items now. We expanded it last year. All present. I checked the maintenance corridor. 47 steps. Exactly right. I checked the seeing monitor. 0.87 arc seconds. At 9 p.m., I begin my first patrol. Parking lot, 2 vehicles. Radio check on channel 6, clear. Dome positions, sealed. At 11 p.m., the temperature in the control room drops by 3 degrees. I pull up the seeing monitor. 0.3 arc seconds. I power it down and start the count. Outside, in the darkness beyond the windows, something begins to circle the building. I hear the footsteps, slow and measured, keeping pace with my own heartbeat. I do not look. I count the steps. I watch the clock. I follow the rules. The sky keeps sending its warnings. I keep receiving them. And every night, I write them down, not for myself, but for whoever comes after me. The next technician, the next watcher, the next person who needs this job badly enough to take it. They will find my notes in the binder alongside the protocols. They will read what I have learned and add their own observations. The rules will grow, adapt, evolve, and the watching will continue. I check the parking lot at midnight. 2 vehicles. I count my steps through the maintenance corridor. 47. I do not open the doors. I do not respond to voices. I do not look at bearing 270 degrees. I survive another night. That is the job.